2020, the year of COVID, of staying home more often than not. For some, this was a period of finding unexpected happiness through more time spent with loved ones and hobbies. And yet, for many, it was the darkest, loneliest, and riskiest time to be alive. Mental health took a steep dive. Vices and inner voices grew louder. Domestic violence rates soared. And in Farmington, New Mexico, that darkness would take a terrible, fatal turn.
Hey guys, we're your hosts. I'm Jess.
And I'm Fenella.
And this is Cosy Crime Club. Each episode we explore real cases from the eerie to the outrageous with curiosity, empathy, and just the right amount of dark humour. So pour yourself a big mug of something warm, tea, coffee, or maybe something a little stronger, grab a blanket and settle in. Welcome to the club. Hey club members, welcome back. We are rolling with the cases. I hope you've liked what we've had this month. But Fenella, it's your case tonight. What are you bringing us?
Our case takes us today to Farmington, New Mexico. And there we meet a man named Robert Hoefer, born on July 26, 1971 in Fullerton, California, but spent most of his life in Farmington, New Mexico. A driven man, Robert was raised by his parents Betty and Douglas. He was tall, fair-skinned, with an easy smile. He had Asperger's or autism. I heard it referred both ways by family. I know that some people do have a bit of attachment to one or either of those labels, but this is how they described it. And he was just kind of guy with an insatiable thirst for knowledge. Robert was often found with a book in hand, reading as if his life depended on it. After performing well in school, he went on to serve nearly a decade in the Navy as a nuclear reactor operator on various submarines. Determined to never stagnate, he went on to earn a Bachelor of Science degree from Eastern New Mexico University in 2012 at the age of 41. And Robert wasn't just a man intent on bettering himself. He had great empathy for the people he knew and strangers alike. He was interested in human rights and treating others well. And in his spare time, when he could tear himself away from a book or from a work opportunity, he loved to cook. He enjoyed trying new things and seeing what dishes he could summon into being. By the time 2020 rolled around and the world was in and out of COVID-19 lockdowns, Robert was planning to qualify as a history teacher, wanting to share the things he knew with the future generation. And he was excited to be at a point in his life where everything felt like it just made sense. He was working at the local library, which for him was obviously absolutely perfect, being a bookworm. And just the year before, in 2019, he'd met a woman named Heather. Blue-eyed with short blonde hair, she was a third-grade teacher at McCormick Elementary School, and the two of them really hit it off. They fell in love quickly, and it wasn't long before they were planning a wedding. On the 5th of September 2020, they tied the knot. From the outside, things seemed to be going really well for the couple. Heather's son Tyler, who was 28 years old at the time, he and his partner Elizabeth and their two children had recently moved in with the couple for support while Elizabeth was pregnant. And this was said to have been Robert's idea, because he'd heard that they didn't have transport at the time, and he wanted to make sure that Elizabeth could make it to her doctor's appointments. Such a sweetheart. His empathy really does shine. It was said that whenever Robert and Heather were together, they were happy. On Facebook, Robert made a post about getting married to her, saying, "I married the most compassionate and kind woman I have ever met today. A truly lovely and caring woman. I also gained a grandson and 3 amazing stepsons. I am a very happy man."
Oh, Robert.
Yeah, so sweet.
And did he post that after his wedding too? Like, today I'm married?
Yeah, so it's really cute.
Aww.
They got married on the 5th of September 2020. And on Facebook, same day, he had changed his status. And then she had commented like this little, just a little sticker or something that said, "I love you." And then he commented in reply with that little spiel there. And I was like, oh, that's too much. That's so sweet.
That is beautiful. What a hectic time to get married. I think I went to a wedding in 2020 and 2021, and it was like very last minute, like, oh, we have to change the guest list. And, I don't know what it was like in New Mexico, but it was pretty wild all over the world.
I know. I think a lot of people were, especially by September in 2020, I think a lot of people At least
Mm.
I know a few people that had been waiting. They already had their plans to get married that had been delayed. And
Mm.
eventually they just thought, you know what, let's just do it now at home in the backyard,
Yeah.
get it over
Yeah.
with. I can't say for sure that's exactly what they did. I do
Mm.
apologize. Don't have that information. But yeah, that's what everyone else was up to.
What a sweetheart, Robert.
Yes, exactly. Now, inspired by his wife Heather, Robert actually planned to commit to his dream of being a history teacher the following year in 2021 because she was a teacher already. They had a lot in common around that, and so she was really inspiring him. But heartbreakingly, that dream was lost before 2021 could even surface because just shy of 3 months into their marriage, everything changed. Around 5:40 a.m. on the morning of Sunday, November 29th, 2020, then 47-year-old Heather Fernandez Hoefer dialed 911. She told dispatchers she found her husband, 49-year-old Robert Hoefer, unresponsive on their bedroom floor. When the police arrived, Heather was waiting for them outside the front of the house, in what seemed to be her pajamas. She didn't say much as she hurriedly beckoned the attending officers into the house. The house itself was so poorly lit that the officers actually needed their torches to navigate their way through it. Remember, this was barely 6 a.m. in late November, early winter for the region, and the sun wouldn't rise for at least another half hour. Yet there didn't seem to be any lights on in the house. The porch lights had been on outside where Heather greeted the officers, but upon entry they were plunged back into darkness. Heather led the officers and their torches from room to room until suddenly stopping outside a door. With a sharp intake of breath, she pushed against the door to open it, but she couldn't quite get it all the way open, it seemed. Something was partially blocking or leaning against it on the other side. Determined, Heather continued to push against the door and then slipped into the room. Blinking in the light, the officers followed her into a very well-lit bedroom. Suddenly, they didn't need their torches anymore. But the return of the light was no comfort once officers realized the horror it revealed. On the floor, to the middle right of the room, behind the door, lay Robert, with 3 deep stab wounds to his chest. It was clear he was dead. At this point, one of the officers asked Heather whether she had seen what had happened in the bedroom, or what had happened to Robert. In response, she let out a wail and seemed to be overcome with emotion, a sudden change from her previously quiet and slightly agitated demeanor. After a few more questions, Heather began describing what, to her knowledge, had happened. She explained that the night before, they had been relaxing, enjoying each other's company. They'd hung out in what she describes as the computer room, while Robert was playing the game Fallout. She recalled that at one point he'd mentioned being hungry, and so she had left him playing the game alone for a while to prepare a pie for him to eat. Soon after this, Robert had complained of a sore chest, but he had a t-shirt on, so she didn't realize that he might have any injuries. As he continued to complain, she took his shirt off and saw where the pain in his chest was coming from. She said she saw some grazes or cuts that were oozing a bit. No excessive injuries, just something possibly self-inflicted. She describes having used a washcloth to clean the wounds up a bit, but that she didn't really think much of it at the time. And so at this point, they had parted ways because Robert wanted to go back to bed and go to sleep for the night, but Heather wasn't quite ready for that yet. She wanted to stay up a bit longer in the living room and just enjoy the rest of her Saturday night. So she stayed up while Robert went to bed, and Heather actually ended up falling asleep on the couch. She woke up a few hours later and realized that she was still on the couch, at which point she decided to move to the bedroom. But when she entered the bedroom, she found Robert face down on the floor between the bed and the door, unresponsive. So she dialed 911. Almost from the get-go, the attending officers knew something was off. The physical scene they were looking at did not match up with the story she was telling them. And while Heather had been showing them the bedroom and explaining what had happened, she was acting strangely, hardly able to keep still. She was doing any number of things interchangeably throughout. searching a cabinet top for Robert's razors in a harried manner, suggesting maybe he used it to harm himself. She was falling to her knees and crying in despair, and then suddenly stopping and engaging in conversation with an officer standing nearby. And at one point, she started rifling through the blankets on the bed, searching for what she muttered might be a steak knife. She even dragged a blanket off the bed and began covering up Robert's body. Now, when she was doing all of this, by the way, when she was looking through the blankets on the bed and all of that, aside from the fact that it is odd, the officers actually were asking her to stop doing that. And they weren't saying don't do it to preserve their scene. They actually were saying stop looking through the bedding and the room, because if she does suspect that there's a steak knife, don't know where that information came from, or razors, then they could still be there. They should still be there in theory if this was something self-inflicted. But she didn't really seem to be taking that in.
So just a really quick question. It was just the paramedics at that point, or were they police officers?
They had police officers there.
So Heather is sounding very suspicious, but I'm not judging yet. I'm still listening. We're still taking in. And I would like to know what happens because this behavior is a little unexpected.
It is unexpected, but as in the American legal system and as at the club, innocent until proven guilty. So let's just see where we go next. At one point, after being asked why she had stayed on the couch to sleep instead of going through to the bedroom to sleep next to Robert, Heather made a show about how Robert had wet the bed, and there was no way that she would sleep in a bed like that. Which doesn't sound so crazy when you think about it. No one wants to sleep in a wet bed, especially if there's a couch on offer. But there was a harsh coldness to her tone in comparison to other times she was speaking. And she doubled down on this by explaining how she'd felt when she'd noticed that he wet the bed, exclaiming, "I was mad." This remark and change in demeanor wasn't lost on the officers. And it seemed as though Heather noticed this abrupt shift herself, actually. She quickly tried to cover it with a shrug and a joke after the fact, mumbling something about how, oh, now I'm saying bad words. But she did add, somehow in her recovery method, the truth comes out. Which I found really strange because she was trying to say she didn't mean it to sound bad, I suppose, and then said, well, the truth comes out. So just something to note.
It's such a strange thing, too, to say. I'm just thinking if your beloved husband, you woke up to him dead, in what world are you, just like my first initial thoughts are like, why would you say anything negative about them in any way? Like when you're just in this crazy moment, your whole world has been turned upside down. Why would you be like, you might say, oh, when they said, why did you sleep on the couch? Be like, oh, he had just wet the bed and I just thought I'd stay there because it was just dry. And that's kind of how you'd finish it. I don't understand why you'd say I was so mad at that. Or I was mad at that. It's a weird comment to make when someone you love has just died. That little part is strange, yeah.
Totally agree. Yeah. The fact that she also noticed that maybe that didn't land so well as well, that kind of stood out to me too, because she tried to backpedal.
Like if you were grieving, you don't have a chance to think about how things are landing. You're like, what has happened?
No, exactly.
Where's my husband? And yes, we all said it and heard it, that we all react differently, but that does seem questionable, at least.
For sure. Now, throughout all of this, officers had been doing their best to direct Heather, telling her to stop what she was doing, she mustn't move anything, mustn't search for things, and definitely mustn't cover up the body, which she was trying to do. She just wasn't listening, basically. She would continue to do whatever it was, making officers repeat themselves again and again, but then she would just start doing something else, and the cycle would repeat. Eventually, after trying multiple times to get Heather to leave the bedroom, they got her to go sit at the kitchen table. And once she was out their way, they noticed something they hadn't before. Now that they had the room to get close to the body, they could see that the wounds to Robert's chest were unsurvivable. At this point, they made the decision to call in detectives, and their focus was put on preserving the scene and getting as much information out of everyone in the home as possible. So Heather's son Tyler, his partner, and their children were soon up and about too. On seeing his mom, Tyler immediately hugged her and made her a cup of coffee. Soon after this, an officer asked Heather if they could search the home. She hesitated, kind of looking around the kitchen. One of the officers spoke again, trying to get her to understand why they need to search the property, saying, "This is not a normal death." But at this, Heather seemed to get a little bit shifty, if she wasn't already. She adjusted her physical position and looked at the ground before glancing back up at the officer with an odd expression as she asked, "This is not a normal death?" And I can't say for totally sure, so this is alleged, but I was watching the case footage from the police body cams, and it seems as though she sort of smiles or half smiles when she responds to the officer in that moment. But she was actually doing that the whole time, throughout, just randomly changing facial expressions and semi-smiling. So unusual, yes, but also she was doing it the whole time. So it didn't stand out as a single incident of something weird. The whole thing was weird. She goes on to explain that she has adult kids who smoke pot. And so she was actually just worried about the cops finding that in their search and something legal happening to her children. But the cops immediately reassured her that actually that wasn't the case, that she didn't need to worry. But she spoke over them, continuing to explain further. She referred to the expression on her face earlier when she had paused before allowing them to search the home when she was hesitant, saying, "Oh, that look on my face, that only appeared there because she was worried about her kids and their pot habits." She was really over explaining this whole situation and her physical reaction. Of course, the officers were already suspicious of her, but they didn't want to push their luck by making her clam up and stop talking. So they just kept reassuring her, like, no, we have no interest in whatever your kids are up to. We literally just want to find anything that could be related to what happened to Robert. That's all we're here for. This seemed to placate Heather because she then agreed to allow them to finally start their search. Soon enough, Heather, Tyler, and Elizabeth, Tyler's partner, were taken to the police station for questioning around the incident. Elizabeth, the daughter-in-law, Tyler's partner, at first she was asked about what it had been like living with Heather and Robert up to that point. To which she said it had been good, explaining that the couple were still in a honeymoon phase and she couldn't really recall ever seeing them argue outside of just minor annoyances that you could have with really anybody that you lived with. And as for the night in question itself, she mentions that she had gotten up a couple of times in the night to feed her baby, but she hadn't heard anything unusual until she got up again at around 4:30 a.m. and she heard Heather crying on the phone. In hindsight, she had assumed that this was the moment Heather dialed 911.
She could have been talking to herself for all they know. Like, I don't know. I'm just like, that's my question.
Yeah.
It's like, did she see her on the phone?
I don't know. The word she used is she heard her on the phone, crying on the phone.
Yeah, interesting.
Now, while the officers had been doing their investigations, their initial investigations that morning still at the property, a neighbor actually offered some information as well. In any case like this, where something happens in a suburban setting, neighbors' input is so valuable. So this neighbor initially seemed to refute the idea that the couple never argued. The neighbor claimed that they actually heard the couple, or at least they heard people within that house, arguing in the early hours of that morning. This was later double-checked, and the details had shifted slightly. Now they were saying that there may have been celebratory yelling or party sounds that they heard, but what they were confident on was that they'd heard two people, a man and a woman, interacting in the small hours at a high volume. Which brings us to Heather, who at this point, I think we've all guessed, is the main initial suspect. Now, Heather's interview was strange. Nothing different from how she'd already been behaving the whole time, but it felt as though the more she revealed, the weirder the story became. Asked about how Robert had complained of pain in his chest, Heather brushed this off, saying that, well, he complains all the time. If it wasn't his chest, it might be his elbow. You could just never tell what he would complain about next.
I'm just like, what, Heather? This goes back as well on what I said before. She just mentioned that thing, like, I was mad that he wet the bed. That was tiny compared to this. Like, what else did he complain about? That is horrendous when that is the same day your beloved husband is found dead. No
New
matter how
husband
that's happened
too.
at this point. Yeah.
Honeymoon
Honeymoon
phase.
phase. Yeah. So I'm just, that is so horrible. You probably caught a million of my eye rolls in that, but I was like, are you kidding? Heather?
Yeah.
Excuse me.
It's
Regardless if
awful.
you're, even if you're not involved, that is so wrong.
I mean, this is talking about someone that you love, but
Mm-hmm.
also just talking about people in general. Just being
Yeah,
so dismissive of, well, it was probably nothing, because I don't know. It's just so dismissive.
that's
But that's how
horrible.
she put it to them, yeah. Asked about whether there was a lot of blood for her to contend with when she was cleaning his wounds, because she had made a point of mentioning that she'd been wiping them up a little bit to some extent. Heather maintained that there wasn't a lot of blood. She said that she had entered the room at about 5 o'clock in the morning, and just remembering that Elizabeth had mentioned she thought that she heard her crying on the phone around 4:30, maybe up to 5 o'clock in the morning, just around that half hour. So now Heather's saying that actually she entered the bedroom at 5 in the morning after waking up on the couch when she found Robert face down on the floor, unresponsive. She rolled him over and first noticed that he had puked in his mouth, which, by her facial expression when she was giving this information, must have disgusted her, because this was the only moment up until now that I saw where she actually looked emotional, to the extent that the officers passed her a box of tissues in case she was going to cry around about the vomit. I know some people have different things that they can and can't bear. Vomit might be one of them. But she's been telling them all this really intense stuff, and I just found that really strange that that's what would really affect her. So after noticing that he had puked in his mouth, she said that she next noticed his eyes. She doesn't go into detail about what she noticed. She just says that at that point, she knew she needed to call 911. She was then asked about Robert's mental state. Heather notes that, to her knowledge, he was happy, not suicidal. She notes that they hadn't been fighting, and things between them were really good, just like everyone else had been saying. And yet she insisted that he had most likely harmed himself, which had led to his death that night, or early that morning. But Heather's story kept changing. From the time she checked on Robert to how she found him to what he'd said, it all changed. One moment she mentioned that she didn't know what he'd used to harm himself. The next she was musing that it could have been a razor. And then the next second she was saying that he had specifically told her that he used a steak knife from the kitchen.
Sorry, so wait, he told her what he used. So he
Well,
was
this is
talking to her.
in one of her versions of events. She checks on him and he tells her, I used a steak knife. And then at some
This
point, I guess she just like fades out of the room and just leaves it at that. I'm not sure.
this is absurd. Just Heather, like I killed myself with a steak knife. Why would you even have to say what type of knife it was? And then Heather's like, just like, I'm just leaving. Like, what?
Yeah,
I don't know what's going on. This case.
it's crazy. This case, everything else that we might hear from different people will sound a lot more cohesive. But every time we're going to circle back to Heather, it's going to get crazy. So just, I'm sure
She
you
keeps it
can already
real
tell that.
lively.
She does. She's very creative. So,
Wow.
yeah. But while this was happening and they were getting all this conflicting information from her, they were also conducting, interviews with Elizabeth, her daughter-in-law, technically her son's partner, but
Mm.
also her son Tyler himself. And just to remember as well that Tyler and Elizabeth had relatively recently moved in to live with them, and
Mm.
this relationship was quite new. So they'd only met in 2019. They married September 2020. Sometime since getting together, Tyler and Elizabeth had moved to live with them. So kind of a short time frame here. But Tyler told the detectives that he didn't know anything and he hadn't heard anything unusual in the night. But he added that he actually tended to take a lot of medication overnight to support his sleep, and because of this, he could sleep through almost anything. So he wasn't very helpful in terms of corroborating any evidence for the timeline or for the night in question. However, he was very useful in helping to fill in some of the blanks around the couple, and in particular, his mother, Heather. Tyler stated that, as far as he knew, his stepdad, Robert, was in a good mental place, that he had never heard him make any kind of remarks about harming himself or anything of that nature. But he described his mom very differently. He said she had a temper. At times, she had gotten physically violent with him. She would throw punches at him, her own son, if the mood struck. He mentioned she and Robert shared a drinking problem, and that Robert especially always had a cold one on him. Tyler was struggling with the circumstances. He was trying to support his mom and stand by her, but he was really struck by the fact that she had mentioned cleaning Robert's injuries. He was very disturbed to hear that, and he couldn't quite get past the suspicions that this raised. And it was really interesting to watch his interview because he circled back to this so many times. And initially he did start off the interview very sort of, I don't know what happened, like, I don't want to say that she did it because I don't know, and why would she do it, and how would she do it? But then he would remember that she was mentioning really odd things, and he would start a cycle of questioning himself throughout the interview and questioning logic. And it really seemed like he kind of wanted answers maybe from the officers in a way, some kind of reassurance that there could be some sense made out of everything that was happening. He was
That would have
extremely
been,
conflicted.
yeah, that would have been really interesting if he was being vocal with his thoughts, like his thoughts were just kind of coming out and he was backtracking, as in not backtracking, but questioning his own beliefs about the situation. That would have been really interesting to watch.
I might link the footage in the description if anyone wants to check it out as well, because it is fascinating and you'll just see everything I've been saying and a whole lot more. There was so much that I could have covered or gone on a tangent with. There's so much in there that's very unusual and questionable. Definitely worth having a look. Well, while all of these interviews were going on, and also meanwhile there's still investigators at the scene, checking things out, the police were trying to get hold of Robert's family because at the moment they've got Heather's family, her children and grandchildren, etc. Police managed to get a hold of Robert's sister Sonia in an effort to corroborate some of the things that they'd been hearing. Sonia noted that while the last year of his life seemed to be the happiest that it had ever been, he had actually always suffered from depression, a common feature of those living with neurodivergence, and Sonia confirmed that the family understood Robert to have Asperger's and that he'd lived a life feeling socially ostracized, managing this with alcohol since he was very young. So that does fill in the picture a bit more, and it does explain, some of the comments that were made. Tyler saying that he's never seen Robert without a cold one kind of fills that in a bit more. But further to this, the investigating team was actually able to track down Robert's first wife too. They wanted to hear her take on things. She mentioned that they had been in on and off contact over the years, and that around 1.5 years prior, in June 2019, Robert had sent her a random message on Facebook saying, "I did not cut deep enough. I'm making a mess." Really
Hang on.
random.
Did you say in 2019?
In 2019, yeah.
What?
So this throws the timeline of how far they're looking to find the problem totally out of whack. Because they have obviously been thinking, well, they don't know what they're thinking yet, but their eyes on Heather. She wasn't really in the picture. They only just met in 2019. Yeah. So that was weird. And they did check. They took the phone. She handed her phone and her Facebook page and messages over. She was like, "This is what I've got." She wasn't trying to manipulate it in any way. She was very transparent, his ex-wife. So very interesting. Now, about this message, she said that the message did bother her, but she didn't really know what to do with it, and she kind of just wrote it off because She was indicating that she rationalized it as he could have just been talking about anything at all, maybe even some ingredients he was preparing for a meal. So she didn't really do anything with it. And it didn't sound as though this was unusual. Every now and then he did randomly just send her some message out of the blue. She didn't sound either as though she was very, very active on Facebook as well, as if she'd sort of seen the message a bit later than when it was sent to. And then, you know what it's like when you see a message too late and you just think, well, just leave it. But she did say that that was the last message he ever sent her. Giving further context, Robert's ex-wife informed the police that she believed Robert had long experienced depression and that he had a drinking problem, which he used as a crutch for this. But she made it very clear that he had never mentioned anything to her about suicide or harming himself. Now, let's turn our attention to what was noted by investigators in terms of evidence. And just bear in mind, we're not going to go through every single excruciating detail here, but we will just cover, a range of evidence that they recovered. At the scene, investigators noted that all signs of an incident were contained to Heather and Robert's bedroom. There were no signs of blood outside the bedroom, and no signs in the computer room of any kind of struggle or cleanup. They agreed that at first, when examining Robert's body at the scene, he had some injuries that appeared superficial. He didn't just have 3 deep cuts. He also bore more shallow scratches. But it didn't take long after a closer look for them to realize that not only were there deeper injuries, but Robert stood no chance of surviving them. In the couple's bedroom on the floor where Robert had been, investigators also noticed a distinct lack of blood. If Heather's theory was correct, that Robert had not only harmed himself, but also moved himself from the bed to the floor while he was still alive until he possibly bled out, then there would be blood stains which showed that pattern. And yet what they saw instead seemed to tell the opposite story. Most of the blood was on the bed itself, hardly on the floor. It was noted that if Robert had moved himself from the bed to the floor, he would of course have had to be alive at the time. And if he was alive with such injuries, he would have continued to bleed profusely while on the floor. This indicated to detectives that whatever had happened in that room, it wasn't self-inflicted by Robert. Or at the very least, someone else was present and involved. Further to this, Heather had mentioned that Robert had vomited in his mouth while he was laying face down. Remember, this is something that made her quite emotional. But the officers didn't locate any vomit. They did find a washcloth in a nearby bathroom with a bit of blood on it, not enough to indicate that anyone had tried to stem a gushing tide of blood, but maybe had used it to wipe a little bit away. And this would fit with Heather's claim to have cleaned up some oozing scratches on his chest. But as officers had realized the extent of the injuries, this no longer seemed to support Heather's version of events. Also, Heather had been so shifty throughout. She was moving things around, doubling back on the things that she said, and generally disobeying orders to simply leave the evidence as it was before the officers finally got her to the kitchen table, which essentially means that the scene was disturbed. But because the main apparent crime was stab wounds to Robert's chest, police were most interested in blood patterns and locations, something that Heather couldn't so easily hide. The types of injuries Robert had, he could never have survived them. But even more than that, they were the sort of gashes that meant he would have bled out within minutes. There would be no way he could have stabbed himself more than once, let alone been able to return a knife to the kitchen or hide a knife. And yet there was no knife found on him or near him in the bedroom.
That was my first little note that I made, one of the earlier notes, was that if he's done this to himself, where is the knife? In any of those situations, the weapon is going to be in your immediate surroundings. So where is the knife?
Yeah, which was, I guess, the idea that she was trying to play off at the start, where she was kind of fumbling around the room trying to, what if he used these razors, and then looking for some razors, or what if he used this, and where's the steak knife? But there was nothing to find. Now, they didn't only have physical evidence, they did also have some digital evidence. Heather and Robert's cell phones had been recovered, and what was found on them again refuted the idea that they never argued. There were text messages back and forth indicating that they had been fighting over money and exes in the lead up to Robert's murder. They had also been arguing about Robert's drinking in the preceding period of time. It seemed that Heather was upset because she couldn't always rely on him to be sober enough to participate in their daily lives. For example, if they needed to go somewhere, there was no guarantee Robert would be able to drive. Now, even though we've gone through a lot of things that sound very odd and don't match up with expectations here, and it seems like there's a whole heap of evidence, and there really is, but the arrest itself, that would take years. It would take years for any external progress to be made on this case. After years of investigation, police finally made their move. April 1st, 2025, Heather Fernandez Hoefer was arrested and charged with second-degree murder and tampering with evidence. She was booked into the San Juan County Adult Detention Center and released on bond the following day. The Farmington Police Department said the case had been under thorough and ongoing review since 2020, and that only after extensive analysis did they decide to move forward with the charges. Following her arrest, the school that she was working for, McCormick Elementary, placed her on administrative leave, which makes sense, I would say, at that point.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but I mean, she had, I guess, still been working there for the 5 years preceding, which is crazy.
I wonder how public it all was, the investigation, I mean.
True.
Obviously, she's like, my husband died, and a lot of parents would be probably trying to help her out and see how they could support her as the teacher of their kids. But yeah, I wonder how much was known about the investigation, because I wonder how long would she have been, was it between when he died and when she was arrested?
It was about 4.5 years, technically 5 years, like 2020 to 2025. But it was November 2020 that he died, and she was arrested in April 2025. So not quite 5 years.
4.5. Yeah, wow, that is a long time.
Yeah, it was a very long time. So life just went back to normal up until then, I imagine, to the degree that it could. But yeah, she was just out and about.
I guess it is innocent until proven guilty, and that's just when she's still, if she's been charged, she now it has to be proven. So yeah, wow.
Yeah, exactly. And we haven't really got there yet. So because she was only just arrested in April of this year, as we speak, we can really see where everything's pointing, but we don't have a verdict. We don't have the sentencing. We don't have access to any of the other evidence that has been collected since. And I'm sure there is so much of it, because if you think about it, like let's say 4 years investigating, maybe 3 years if, delays in paperwork and things. That's a good amount of time to be investigating, and they already had so much that was bizarre at the scene that in itself is already such red flags. And the interviews, all of that evidence too, the initial interviews were crazy.
I was going to say the interviews in the station, but also the body cam footage is probably going to be quite damning. Also, I'm sure there is a lot of physical evidence that is going to be really difficult to explain away, of how physically he can get into that position. Yeah. Wow. So it's in proceedings, like it's still ongoing.
It is. Yeah. And I'm really interested to keep tabs on this one.
Oh, so this is one we are absolutely going to
do an update on.
Yes,
100%,
absolutely. Yeah. Wow, I really want to know where this goes. So they haven't charged anyone else. It was just Heather.
Yeah, she was the only one. This case did send ripples through the Farmington community, of course. A respected local teacher was accused of killing her husband. It raised questions about how such a case could linger so long without closure, which is what we were just talking about. Heather was described in Robert's obituary as the love of his life, but now she stood accused of taking it. I do also have here just a statement from the Farmington Police Department, which was released the day after the arrest, and they said, "The Farmington Police Department has arrested and charged Heather Fernandez Hoefer, 51, with second-degree murder and tampering with evidence in connection with a 2020 homicide. On November 29, 2020, officers responded to a residence in the 700 block of South Ivy Avenue regarding a report of unresponsive individual. Upon arrival, officers discovered Robert Hoefer, 49, deceased from 3 apparent stab wounds. Heather Fernandez Hoefer, who made the 911 call, provided conflicting statements during the initial investigation. After a thorough and ongoing investigation by detectives and working with the district attorney's office, a thorough review of the case was conducted, and the decision to proceed with criminal charges was made. A warrant was issued to charge Heather Fernandez Hoefer. She was taken into custody without incident on April 1st, 2025. Now, the police have said that the investigation does remain ongoing, of course, and anyone with information is urged to contact them, and that would specifically be Farmington Police Department, so any locals, please do, if you have any information. But I also found it kind of interesting that she was taken into custody without incident. She didn't necessarily resist arrest or anything.
It is interesting because of the somewhat, you could argue, dramatics that happened when police initially arrived at the property, and probably by the sounds of it through the interviews as well. So to be arrested without any incident seems a little strange for Heather.
Out of character, isn't it? Yeah, that's what I thought.
Out of her chaotic character.
Yeah. Now, the story doesn't have a neat ending, at least not yet. While Heather's trial is yet to begin, many questions remain. Did Heather Fernandez Hoefer truly get away with murder for nearly 5 years? Or could there be more to the story? What really happened in the house that night? Every unsolved case is a shadow cast over the people who remember. And in the quiet town of Farmington, the pandemic's long echo still carries this question. What do we really know about the people we love the most? And how far will someone go to keep secrets buried? Follow along with us for updates as this case progresses. We look forward to seeing closure in this case for the family involved and to sharing their here as it unfolds.
Well, Fenella, thank you so much for bringing us this case. I mean, I hadn't heard of it. I'm very keen to see the footage from it. And I think it's important to remember that Robert just sounded like such a lovely person and genuine. And I think obviously he had challenges in his life, but just it's definitely stuck with me, that little message that we talked about at the start, what a sweetheart. So I'm really interested as well to hear what Heather's story is going to be and what her defense is. That will be a really great update. Thank you for bringing it to us. But next week, join us as we talk about a case that is solved and is a little closer to home. Thanks for getting cozy with us today, guys. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review or share the club with a friend. You can join us on YouTube, Instagram, and Spotify, because here we leave the kettle on and the comments open. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and stay cozy.